The dusty stagecoach rattled to a stop outside the largest cattle ranch in San Elizario, Texas. And when the door opened, 5 dirt-smudged faces peered out at the sprawling property with a mixture of hope and exhaustion that would have broken a lesser man's heart. Florence Abbott stepped down first, her worn calico dress doing little to hide the proud set of her shoulders despite the circumstances that had brought her here. Behind her came the children, ranging from 4 to 12 years old, each carrying what little they owned in bundles tied with twine. The advertisement had been clear. Experienced ranch hand needed, room and board included. What it had not mentioned was whether children were welcome, but Florence had learned long ago that desperation left little room for waiting on perfect opportunities. The main house rose before them, a sturdy 2-story structure of adobe and timber that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Cattle grazed as far as the eye could see, their lowing carrying on the hot September wind of 1878. Florence straightened her bonnet, smoothed down her oldest daughter's tangled hair, and tried to ignore the way her heart hammered against her ribs. This was their 7th attempt at finding work that would keep them all together. The previous 6 had ended before they began, doors closing the moment potential employers saw the children. "Mama, I am thirsty," whispered 4-year-old Timothy, tugging at her skirts. "Soon, sweetheart. Be patient just a little longer." The ranch house door opened, and a man emerged onto the wide porch. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar and eyes that were almost startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. He wore working clothes, denim pants and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He could not have been more than 30, Florence estimated, perhaps a few years younger. Certainly closer to her own age of 29 than she had expected from the owner of such an impressive spread. "Madam," he said, descending the steps with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. His voice was deep, textured with a slight drawl that marked him as Texas-born. "I am Douglas Spencer. You must be here about the position." Florence felt her children press closer behind her, and she resisted the urge to simply turn around, climb back into that stagecoach, and spare them all the inevitable disappointment. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. "Florence Abbott, sir." "Yes, I am here about the ranch hand position. The advertisement said the interview was today at 2 o'clock. Douglas Spencer's eyes had already moved past her to the children. Florence watched his expression, waiting for the familiar tightening around the mouth, the polite but firm shake of the head. She had seen it so many times that she could predict the words before they formed. "I am sorry, but this is no place for children. Perhaps if you find someone to take them in. We need someone who can focus solely on the work." But Douglas Spencer surprised her. His eyes moved from 12-year-old Sarah, who stood with her arms crossed defensively, to 10-year-old James, who met his gaze with the too-old seriousness of a boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. Then to 8-year-old Margaret, hiding half behind her older sister, 7-year-old William, clutching a battered wooden horse, and finally little Timothy, whose thumb had found its way to his mouth despite Florence's earlier warnings about making a good impression. "5 children," Douglas said, but there was no judgment in his tone, merely observation. "Yes, sir, 5 children. They are good children, hard workers for their ages. Sarah can cook and clean. James knows his way around animals. The younger ones do not eat much, and they are learning their letters. I know the advertisement did not mention bringing a family, but I am a hard worker, Mr. Spencer. I grew up on a ranch in Colorado. I can ride, rope brand, and I am not afraid of long hours or difficult work. If you give me a chance, I will prove that I can do everything you need and more." The words tumbled out faster than she intended, edged with the desperation she had tried so hard to conceal. Behind her, she felt Sarah stiffen with embarrassment, and Florence wanted to kick herself. Begging never helped. It only made people uncomfortable, made them want to escape the situation faster. Douglas Spencer was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made Florence want to look away. She forced herself to hold his gaze, to let him see that she meant every word. The afternoon sun beat down on them, and she could feel sweat beginning to trickle down her spine beneath her dress. Timothy shifted restlessly, and she put a gentle hand on his shoulder to still him. "Where is your husband, Mrs. Abbott?" Douglas asked finally. The question was not unexpected, but it still sent a spike of old grief through Florence's chest. "Dead, sir. 2 years now. Cholera took him in the winter of 1876. I am sorry for your loss." The words sounded genuine, not perfunctory. "And you have been caring for 5 children on your own since then?" "Yes, sir. We managed for a while on what we had saved, but savings do not last forever. We have been traveling for 3 months now, looking for work. I can provide references from our time in Colorado, though I will be honest and tell you that none of the recent places we have applied have been willing to take us on. Because of the children." "Yes, sir, because of the children." Douglas Spencer nodded slowly, then surprised her again by crouching down to bring himself to eye level with Timothy. "What is your name, son?" Timothy pulled his thumb from his mouth and whispered, "Timothy Joseph Abbott." "That is a fine name. Are you hungry, Timothy Joseph Abbott?" Timothy nodded vigorously. Douglas stood, and Florence braced herself for the dismissal. Instead, he said, "I have enough room for 6. For a moment, Florence was certain she had misheard him. "I beg your pardon. I said I have enough room for 6. The ranch house has 4 bedrooms upstairs that nobody is using. The children can have 3 of them, and you can have the 4th. I have been running this place mostly alone since my father died last spring, with just 2 other hands who bunk in the foreman's house. I need someone who can help with the daily operations, and if you are as capable as you say, then I do not see why your children should be an obstacle. In fact, having more people around might be good for this place. It has been too quiet for too long." Florence stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You are saying you will hire me. All of us can stay." "That is what I am saying. The position pays $30 a month plus room and board for your whole family. The children will be expected to help with age-appropriate chores, and if they want schooling, there is a teacher in town who comes out to the ranches 3 days a week. Does that sound acceptable to you, Mrs. Abbott?" Florence felt her throat tighten with emotion she could not afford to show. $30 a month was more than fair, and room and board for 6 people was more than she had dared to hope for. "Yes, sir. That sounds more than acceptable. That sounds like an answer to prayer." A ghost of a smile crossed Douglas Spencer's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made Florence's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with relief over employment. "I am not sure I have ever been called an answer to prayer before, but I will take the compliment. Come on inside, all of you. Maria, my housekeeper, will have lunch ready, and you all look like you could use a good meal. We can discuss the details of your duties after you have eaten and rested." He turned and headed back toward the house, clearly expecting them to follow. Florence looked down at her children, saw the same disbelief reflected in their faces that she felt in her heart. Sarah was the first to move, stepping forward cautiously as if afraid the offer might evaporate if they moved too quickly. "Is it real, Mama?" Margaret whispered. "Does he really mean it?" "I think he does, sweetheart. I truly think he does." They followed Douglas Spencer into the ranch house, and Florence felt something shift inside her chest as they crossed the threshold. The interior was clean but sparse, decorated with the practical sensibility of a man who had not had a woman's touch in his life for some time. The furniture was sturdy and well made, the floors swept clean, but there were no curtains on the windows, no rugs to soften the wood floors, no pictures on the walls. A Mexican woman emerged from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60, with silver streaking through her black hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she saw the children. "Maria, this is Mrs. Abbott and her children. They will be staying with us. Mrs. Abbott is the new ranch hand I have been looking for. Can you set extra places for lunch?" Maria's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Senator Douglas. There is plenty of stew and fresh bread. Welcome, Senora Abbott. Children, come with me to the kitchen and wash your hands. You look like you have been traveling a long time." The children looked to Florence for permission, and she nodded. They followed Maria, even Sarah allowing herself to be shepherded away, leaving Florence alone with Douglas Spencer in the front room. "I want to thank you, Mr. Spencer," Florence began, but he held up a hand. "Douglas, please. If we are going to be working together, formality seems unnecessary. And you do not need to thank me. I need help and you need work. It is a fair exchange. It is more than that, and you know it." Most men would not even have let me finish speaking once they saw the children. Douglas was quiet for a moment, looking toward the kitchen where the sound of her children's voices mingled with Maria's. "My mother died when I was 8, he said finally. "Fever took her. My father never remarried, threw himself into building this ranch instead. When he died last year, I inherited all of this, but I also inherited his loneliness. This house is too big and too empty for just one person. I figured if I had to hire help anyway, why not hire someone who would bring some life back into these rooms?" There was something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed Florence's own, that made her see him differently. Not just as an employer, but as a man who understood loss, who knew what it meant to carry on when the people you loved were gone. "Still," she said softly, "it is a kindness and I will not forget it." Their eyes met, and Florence felt a flutter of something she had not felt in a long time, something she immediately tried to suppress. She could not afford to be foolish. Douglas Spencer was her employer, nothing more, and she needed to keep this position more than she needed anything else in the world. "Come," Douglas said, breaking the moment. "Let me show you the ranch while Maria gets the children settled. You should know what you are getting into." They walked out through the back of the house, and Florence got her first real look at the Spencer ranch. It was impressive by any standard, stretching across hundreds of acres of Texas grassland. Cattle dotted the landscape, and in the distance, she could see riders working with a herd. Douglas pointed out the various buildings. The bunkhouse where his 2 permanent hands stayed, the stable housing at least 20 horses, the barn, the smokehouse, the root cellar, the workshop. "We run about 500 head of cattle right now," Douglas explained as they walked. "In the spring, we do a drive north to the railhead in Colorado. That is our main income for the year. The rest of the time, we are maintaining the herd, dealing with calving, breaking horses, fixing fences, all the usual ranch work. It is hard work, but I will not ask you to do anything I would not do myself." "I am not afraid of hard work," Florence assured him. "What I want to know is what you need most urgently. Where are the gaps that need filling?" Douglas looked at her with something like approval. "Right now, my biggest problem is that I am stretched too thin. Jake and Tom, my 2 hands, are good men, but they are getting older. Jake is nearly 60, and Tom is not far behind. They can still work cattle and handle the day-to-day operations, but I need someone who can take on more responsibility, someone who can think independently and handle problems without constant supervision. I also need help with the books and correspondence. My father handled that side of things, and I have been muddling through, but it is not my strength. I can do books, Florence said. My father made sure I had a solid education before I married. I can read, write, and cipher. I kept the accounts for my husband's farm in Colorado. That would be incredibly helpful. There is also the matter of supplies and planning. Maria does her best, but she is getting older too, and managing a household this size is a lot for one person. If you could work with her on that, it would take a burden off everyone. They had reached a fence line, and Douglas leaned against it, looking out over his land with an expression that was part pride, part worry. I am going to be honest with you, Florence. May I call you Florence? Yes, of course. I am in a bit of a tight spot financially. My father invested heavily in expanding the herd before he died, and it has left the ranch with significant debts. If we have a good drive this spring, we will be fine. If something goes wrong, I could lose everything my father built. I am telling you this because I want you to know that while I can guarantee your wages, the future of this place is not entirely certain. If you would rather find something more stable, I will understand. Florence thought about the last 3 months of rejection, of watching her children grow thinner and more despairing with each town they passed through. She thought about the dwindling coins in her purse and the growing desperation that had kept her awake at night. Stability was an illusion. She had learned that the hard way. Nothing in this life is certain, Douglas. My husband and I had plans too, a future we thought was secure. Then he was gone, and all those plans meant nothing. What matters is today, and today you are offering my children a home and me a chance to provide for them. That is more certainty than we have had in a long time. Douglas turned to look at her, and the intensity in his blue eyes made Florence's breath catch. You are a remarkable woman, Florence Abbott. I am a desperate woman, she corrected, trying to keep her tone light. But I appreciate the compliment nonetheless. Desperation and strength are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I think desperation often reveals strength we did not know we had. Before Florence could respond, a shout came from the direction of the barn. Douglas straightened immediately, his hand instinctively dropping to where a gun would normally hang. "Wait here," he said, already moving toward the sound, but Florence did not wait. She followed him, her heart pounding, hoping that whatever was wrong was not serious enough to threaten this fragile new beginning. They reached the barn to find one of Douglas's hands, a weathered man with gray streaking his beard, standing over a horse in one of the stalls. The animal was down, thrashing weakly, its sides heaving. "Colic," the man said without preamble, "came on sudden. I found him like this 10 minutes ago." Douglas swore under his breath and immediately entered the stall, kneeling beside the horse. "How bad?" "Bad enough. He is not responding to movement. Might be a twist." Florence knew enough about horses to understand the gravity of the situation. A twisted intestine was often fatal, and even if it was not twisted, severe colic could kill a horse within hours. "Get me a stomach tube and some mineral oil," Douglas ordered. "And send Tom for the veterinarian in town, though I doubt he will get here in time." Florence watched as Douglas worked with calm efficiency, speaking soothingly to the horse while examining him. There was a gentleness in his hands despite their size, a patience that spoke of genuine care for the animal. Without being asked, Florence entered the stall. "What do you need me to do?" Douglas looked up, surprised. "You should not be in here, he could kick." "I grew up around horses." "Tell me what you need." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he nodded. "Hold his head. Keep him calm. Talk to him." Florence knelt in the straw and laid a hand on the horse's neck, feeling the heat radiating from his skin, the tremors that ran through his muscles. She began speaking in a low, steady voice, nonsense words and gentle reassurances, while Douglas worked to administer the oil that might relieve the blockage causing the colic. They stayed there for over an hour, long past when Maria called them for lunch, long past when Florence's knees began to ache from kneeling in the straw. Gradually, the horse's breathing began to ease. The tight distension of his belly softened slightly. Douglas sat back on his heels, exhaling with relief. "I think he is going to make it." "Thank God," Florence breathed. Douglas looked at her, really looked at her, and Florence became suddenly aware of how she must appear, her dress stained with sweat and dirt, straw in her hair, kneeling in a barn stall. But what she saw in his eyes was not disapproval or disdain. It was respect. "You really did grow up on a ranch," he said. "I told you I did. Did you think I was lying?" "No, but there is a difference between knowing how to ride and being willing to get your hands dirty in a situation like this. You did not hesitate. The horse needed help. Why would I hesitate?" Douglas smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. "Why indeed? Come on, let's get you back to the house. Your children are probably worried, and Maria will be scandalized that I let you miss lunch on your first day." They walked back together, and Florence became aware of the picture they must present, both covered in sweat and dirt, walking side by side like partners rather than employer and employee. It felt comfortable in a way that should have worried her, but she was too tired and too relieved to analyze it. The children were indeed worried, standing on the porch with Maria, who took one look at Florence and started scolding in rapid Spanish. Douglas held up his hands in mock surrender. "My fault entirely, Maria. There was a sick horse. Mrs. Abbott was helping me. We will clean up before we eat." Maria continued to scold even as she ushered Florence inside and upstairs to show her the bedrooms. The children's rooms were simple but clean, each with beds and dressers and windows that looked out over the ranch. Florence's room was larger, with a double bed covered in a faded quilt and a trunk at its foot. "It is not fancy," Maria said, her English accented but clear. "But it is clean and the roof does not leak. The children can pick which rooms they want. Senator Douglas said to make sure they have everything they need." "It is perfect," Florence said and meant it. After weeks of cheap boarding houses and one disastrous week sleeping in a barn, these rooms looked like luxury. Maria helped her wash and change into her only other dress, which was not much cleaner than the first but at least was not covered in horse sweat. When Florence came downstairs, she found Douglas already at the table, cleaned up and changed as well. The children were seated around him, and he was showing Timothy how to properly hold a spoon, his large hands gentle as they guided the child's smaller ones. The sight made Florence's heart constrict. Her children had been without a father for 2 years, and while she had tried to be both parents to them, she knew they missed having a man in their lives. James especially had become withdrawn, taking on responsibilities too heavy for his young shoulders. Seeing Douglas interact with Timothy with such patience made her realize how much her children had been lacking. Lunch was a lively affair, more lively than Florence could remember in a long time. The stew was rich and filling, the bread fresh and warm. Douglas asked each child about themselves, drawing out even shy Margaret with questions about her favorite things. He learned that Sarah loved to read, that James dreamed of being a rancher himself one day, that Margaret collected interesting rocks, that William wanted a dog, and that Timothy liked horses even though he had never actually ridden one. "We will have to remedy that," Douglas said. "Every child should know how to ride, especially if they are going to live on a ranch. We have a gentle mare named Daisy who would be perfect for teaching." William's eyes went wide. "Do you really have a dog?" "Two, actually. They are out with Jake and Tom right now, helping with the cattle. Their names are Scout and Blue. Scout is a cattle dog, very serious about her work. Blue is supposed to be a cattle dog, but mostly he just wants to play. I think you and he will get along well." The joy on William's face was almost painful to see. Florence had tried so hard to provide for her children's physical needs that their emotional needs had sometimes fallen by the wayside. Seeing them respond to Douglas's kindness reminded her of what they had lost, but also gave her hope for what they might gain. After lunch, Douglas showed Florence to the ranch office, a small room off the main living area filled with papers, ledgers, and correspondence in various states of organization. He looked slightly embarrassed as he gestured to the chaos. "I told you this was not my strength. My father had a system, but I cannot figure it out. Bills are somewhere in that pile, paid invoices are somewhere else, and I have letters from buyers that I need to respond to, but I have not had time." Florence looked at the disaster with a practiced eye. "Give me 3 days. I will have it organized and will be able to tell you exactly where you stand financially." 3 days. Really, really. It looks worse than it is. Things just need to be sorted and filed properly. Douglas looked at her with something like awe. "You might just save this ranch, Florence Abbott." "Let us hope so," Florence said, already mentally categorizing the piles. "Because we need this as much as you need us." The rest of that first day passed in a blur of activity. While Florence began sorting papers, Douglas took the children on a tour of the ranch. She could hear their excited voices through the window, hear Douglas explaining things with infinite patience. When they returned for dinner, they were all wind-blown and happy, full of stories about the horses and cattle they had seen. That night, after the children were in bed, Florence sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing the notes she had made about the ranch's finances. The situation was serious but not hopeless. Douglas had been right about the debts, but the ranch was also bringing in steady income. With careful management and a successful spring drive, they could turn things around. Douglas found her there near midnight, still working by lamplight. "You should be resting," he said. "You have had a long day. So have you, and you are still awake." He smiled and poured himself coffee from the pot that was always kept warm on the stove. "Fair point. May I sit? It is your house. It is your kitchen now, too." He sat across from her, his large frame making the chair look small. "What is the verdict? How bad is it?" Florence appreciated his directness. "It is manageable. You are carrying about $3,000 in debt, which sounds like a lot, but your assets far exceed that. The ranch itself is worth at least 10 times that amount. Your herd is healthy and growing. The problem is cash flow. Most of your money is tied up in the cattle, which you cannot convert to cash until the spring drive. In the meantime, you have ongoing expenses and debt payments. So what do I do? We cut unnecessary expenses where we can. We make sure nothing happens to the herd between now and spring. And we negotiate with your creditors for better terms. Most of them would rather work with you than foreclose. Foreclosing is expensive and uncertain. If I write the letters, position it correctly, I think we can get at least some of them to extend your payment schedule." Douglas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "You know, when I placed that advertisement, I was expecting someone who could help with the physical labor. I never imagined I would find someone who could help save the entire operation. Don't celebrate yet. We still have to make it through the winter and get those cattle to market. A lot can go wrong between now and then. Ever the optimist, ever the realist. Optimism does not keep you alive. Planning does." Douglas laughed, a warm sound that filled the quiet kitchen. I think you and I are going to work well together, Florence Abbott. Florence felt that flutter in her chest again and firmly ignored it. I hope so. My children are already settling in. Sarah told me this evening that she has not felt this safe in 2 years. I cannot afford to lose this position. The laughter faded from Douglas's face, replaced by something more serious. You will not lose it, I promise you that. Whatever happens with the ranch, I will make sure you and your children are taken care of. You cannot promise that. You do not know what the future holds. Maybe not, but I can promise that I will try. That has to be worth something. It was worth more than he knew, but Florence could not find the words to tell him that. Instead, she simply nodded and returned her attention to the papers in front of her, though she was acutely aware of his presence across the table, solid and reassuring in a way that both comforted and unsettled her. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Florence rose before dawn to help Maria with breakfast, then spent the mornings working on the ranch accounts and correspondence. In the afternoons, she worked alongside Douglas and his hands, learning the specific operations of the Spencer Ranch. She had not exaggerated her abilities. She could ride well, could work cattle with the best of them, and quickly earned the respect of both Jake and Tom. The children thrived. Sarah took on helping Maria in the house, learning to cook and manage a household on this scale. James followed Douglas everywhere, soaking up knowledge about ranching like a sponge. Margaret found a whole collection of interesting rocks in the creek bed behind the house. William bonded instantly with Blue, who became his constant companion. Timothy learned to ride on gentle Daisy, his delighted laughter echoing across the ranch. The schoolteacher, Miss Harriet Chen, arrived on her first scheduled day, a small Chinese woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She had been teaching ranch children in the area for 5 years, traveling between properties on a circuit. She assessed the Abbott children with a few quick questions and pronounced them behind in mathematics, but ahead in reading. I can work with them, she told Florence. They are bright children. They just need consistency. Consistency was something Florence could finally provide, and watching her children settle into a routine of school lessons, chores, and play felt like watching flowers bloom after a long drought. As September gave way to October, the Texas heat began to ease slightly, though the days were still warm. Florence worked alongside Douglas more and more, and she began to notice things about him that had nothing to do with his capability as a rancher. The way he laughed at Timothy's jokes, even the ones that made no sense. The patience he showed James when teaching him to rope. The gentleness with which he treated the animals. The quiet sadness that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. One evening, after the children were in bed, Florence found Douglas sitting on the porch, looking out over the darkening land. She brought him coffee and sat beside him without asking permission, comfortable enough now to take such liberties. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. "You did not have to, I know, but you look like you could use it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the stable, the wind through the grass. "Can I ask you something?" Douglas said finally. "Of course." "What was he like? Your husband?" The question surprised Florence, but she found she did not mind answering. "Thomas was a good man, steady, reliable kind. We grew up together in Colorado. Our family's farms were adjacent, so we had known each other our whole lives. Getting married seemed like the natural thing to do. We were both 18. Did you love him?" Florence thought about that, about the comfortable partnership she and Thomas had shared. "Yes, I did. Not in the passionate, all-consuming way you read about in books, but in the steady, dependable way of two people who chose each other and built a life together. He was a good father, a good husband. His death broke something in me, but not because I could not imagine life without him. Because I knew I could, and I had 5 children depending on me to do it. Douglas was quiet for a moment. That is the loneliest kind of grief, I think, when the person is gone but the responsibilities remain. Yes, Florence said softly. Yes, it is. What about you? You said your mother died when you were 8, and your father last year. That is a lot of loss. It is. My father remarried once when I was 12, but it did not last. She was a town woman, could not handle the isolation of ranch life. She left after a year. After that, my father never looked at another woman. He poured everything into this place, into building something that would last. I think he was trying to create something permanent in a world where everything else had proven temporary. And now that responsibility is yours. Now that responsibility is mine, Douglas agreed. Some days I wonder if I am equal to it. My father made it look easy, but I am learning it is anything but. You are doing well. The ranch is running smoothly, your hands respect you, and the cattle are healthy. Those are not small things. I could not do it without you. In just a few weeks, you have taken so much off my plate. The paperwork alone was drowning me. That is what you hired me for. I hired you as a ranch hand. You have become much more than that. You have become my partner in this operation. Partner. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning that Florence was not sure how to interpret. She was very aware suddenly of how close they were sitting, how the lamplight from inside cast warm shadows across Douglas's face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight curve of his lips. Florence, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. I need to tell you something. Before he could continue, a shout came from inside the house. Both of them were on their feet instantly, rushing inside to find William at the top of the stairs, tears streaming down his face. Timothy is sick, he cried. He is really hot and he will not wake up right. Florence took the stairs 2 at a time, Douglas right behind her. In the small room Timothy shared with William, she found her youngest son thrashing in his bed, his skin burning with fever, his eyes glassy and unfocused when they briefly opened. Timothy, sweetheart, can you hear me? Florence pressed her hand to his forehead and felt her heart drop. The fever was dangerously high. Douglas was already moving. I will ride for the doctor. Maria will know what to do in the meantime. He was gone before Florence could respond, his boots thundering down the stairs. Maria appeared moments later, roused by the commotion, and together they began the work of trying to bring down Timothy's fever. Cool cloths, water to sip if he would take it, prayers whispered under their breath. The other children gathered in the doorway, frightened and silent. Sarah took charge of them without being asked, herding them back to their rooms, though Florence knew none of them would sleep. The hours that followed were the longest of Florence's life. She held Timothy's small body as it burned with fever, watched him struggle with whatever illness had taken hold so suddenly. She prayed more fervently than she had since Thomas died, bargaining with God in the desperate way of mothers since time began. Douglas returned with the doctor just before dawn. Dr. Samuel Wright was a capable man in his 50s who had been practicing medicine in San Elizario for 20 years. He examined Timothy thoroughly while Florence hovered nearby, her hands twisted in her skirts. "It is scarlet fever, doctor," Wright announced finally. "Common enough, but serious in one so young. The next 48 hours will be critical. You have been doing the right things. Keep him cool, get fluids in him when you can, and watch for any worsening of symptoms. If he starts having difficulty breathing, send for me immediately." "Will he survive?" Florence asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dr. Wright's expression was kind but honest. "I have seen it go both ways. He is young and was healthy before this, which is in his favor. But fever like this is unpredictable. All we can do is our best and trust in God's will. God's will. Florence had learned that God's will was not always merciful, not always kind. Sometimes God's will took healthy men in their prime and left their widows to struggle. Sometimes God's will seemed capricious and cruel. But she nodded because what else could she do? Dr. Wright left medicines and instructions, and Douglas paid him without question, though Florence knew the money was needed elsewhere. After the doctor departed, Douglas did not leave. He pulled a chair up beside Timothy's bed and settled into it. "What are you doing?" Florence asked, staying. "You should not go through this alone. You have a ranch to run. Jake and Tom can handle it for a day or two. I am staying." Florence wanted to argue, but the truth was she was terrified, and the thought of having someone beside her, someone strong and capable and calm, was more comforting than she wanted to admit. So she simply nodded and returned her attention to Timothy. They took turns through that day and the following night, one of them always at Timothy's bedside while the other caught a few hours of rest. Maria brought food they barely touched, and the other children tiptoed through the house, their usual energy subdued by worry. On the second night, around 3 in the morning, Timothy's fever finally broke. One moment he was burning up, thrashing and delirious, and the next his skin began to cool, his breathing to ease. He opened his eyes, truly focused for the first time in 2 days, and whispered, "Mama." Florence burst into tears, unable to contain the relief and fear and exhaustion that had been building for 2 days. She gathered Timothy into her arms, holding him carefully, and wept into his hair. She felt Douglas's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, anchoring her. "He is going to be all right," Douglas said softly. "He is going to be all right." When Dr. Wright returned the next morning to check on his patient, he pronounced Timothy out of danger, though he would need rest and care for another week before he was fully recovered. Florence thanked him with tears still wet on her cheeks, and Douglas paid him again, waving off Florence's protests that she would pay him back. "Your son," Douglas said simply. "Your family. That makes it my responsibility too." Those words stayed with Florence long after Dr. Wright left, after Douglas finally went to catch up on the ranch work he had been neglecting, after Maria had made sure Timothy was comfortable and dozing peacefully. "Your family. That makes it my responsibility too." When had her family become his responsibility? When had this transition happened from employer and employee to something more? Something that felt dangerously like partnership, like family. Florence did not have answers, but she knew something had shifted during those 2 days of keeping vigil over her sick child. She had seen Douglas in a different light, not as the rancher who had given her a job, but as a man who stayed when he could have left, who paid for doctors without hesitation, who held vigil through the long dark hours because he could not bear the thought of her doing it alone. She was not sure when she started falling in love with him, but looking back, she thought it might have been then, in those quiet hours before dawn, when they worked together to save her son's life. Timothy's recovery was slow but steady. Within a week, he was sitting up and demanding food with his usual enthusiasm, which Maria declared the best sign of all. The other children, relieved beyond measure, showered him with attention until he grew tired of being coddled and demanded to be allowed to play. It was mid-October when life returned to normal, or at least the new normal they had established. Florence returned to her dual duties of managing the books and working the ranch. The weather had turned cooler, which made the outdoor work more pleasant, but also signaled the approaching winter and the need to prepare. Douglas increased her responsibilities gradually, until she found herself making decisions about the ranch without consulting him first, knowing he trusted her judgment. It was intoxicating, this trust, this sense of being valued not just as a worker but as a partner. One afternoon, while they were mending a fence line together, Douglas brought up the spring cattle drive. "I will be taking about 40 head north to Colorado in April," he said, stretching a wire tight while Florence hammered in a staple. "It is a 2-month trip there and back. I was planning to take Jake and Tom with me, but Jake's knees are getting bad. I'm not sure he is up for that kind of journey anymore." "Who else can you take?" "That is the problem. Most of the men in the area who would normally hire on for a drive are already committed to other ranches. I am going to have to look further afield, which means hiring people I do not know well. It makes me nervous, trusting the success of the whole operation to strangers." Florence straightened, an idea forming. "Take me." Douglas stopped working and looked at her. "What? Take me?" "I have done a cattle drive before with my father when I was younger. I know what is involved. You trust me, and I know the finances well enough to understand how critical this drive is. Take me instead of Jake." "Florence, it is 2 months of hard riding, sleeping on the ground, dealing with weather and stampedes and river crossings. It is dangerous. I know what it is. I also know you need someone reliable, someone you trust. I can do it. What about your children?" Florence had already thought of that. "Maria can watch them. Sarah is nearly 13 now, old enough to help, and I will be back by early June before the really hot weather sets in. They will be fine for 2 months. Douglas shook his head, but she could see he was considering it. "I do not know. The trail is no place for a woman." "That is ridiculous, and you know it. There are women on every wagon train that crosses this country. I am not asking to be coddled. I am asking to work." "I know you are not asking to be coddled. You never do. But if something happened to you, what would happen to your children? They have already lost one parent. And if something happens to this ranch because the cattle drive fails, we lose our home. Everything is a risk, Douglas. At least this way I can help ensure the success." They argued about it for another hour, Douglas raising objections and Florence countering them. Finally, he threw up his hands. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. Thank you. That was not a compliment. I am taking it as one anyway. So is that a yes?" Douglas looked at her for a long moment, and Florence saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something warm and wondering and maybe a little scared. "Yes," he said finally, "but only because I know you are right. I do need someone I trust, and that someone is you. But Florence, you have to promise me you will be careful. You have to promise me you will let me know if it gets to be too much." "I promise. Though it will not be too much." So confident, so realistic. "I know what I am capable of." Douglas smiled, that smile that transformed his face and made Florence's heart skip. "Yes, you do. All right then, partner. We will do this together. Partner." There was that word again, and this time Florence let herself acknowledge what it meant, the layers of meaning it carried. They were partners in the ranch, yes, but somewhere along the way, they had become partners in something more, something neither of them had quite put words to yet. November brought the first real cold, and with it the work of preparing the ranch for winter. Cattle had to be moved to lower pastures, supplies laid in, equipment repaired before the weather made it impossible. Florence worked long days alongside Douglas, and in the evenings they sat together over the ranch accounts, planning for the spring. It was during one of these evenings that Douglas finally spoke what had been building between them for weeks. "Florence, I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how to say it." Florence looked up from the ledger she was reviewing, her heart suddenly pounding. "Just say it plainly." "That has always worked for us before." Douglas stood and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. "When you first arrived here with your children, I told myself I was just being practical. I needed help, you needed work. It was a simple business arrangement. But it has become more than that. You have become more than that. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as an employee and started thinking of you as someone I could not imagine this ranch without. Someone I could not imagine my life without." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression took Florence's breath away. "I am falling in love with you, Florence. Maybe I have been since that first day when you stood on my porch with your 5 children and told me you were not afraid of hard work. I do not know when it happened, but I know it is true. And I know this is not simple, that you are still mourning your husband, that you have 5 children to think about, that maybe you do not feel the same way. But I had to tell you because keeping it inside was becoming impossible." Florence stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. What she had not known was what she would say when it arrived. "Douglas," she began, then stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days just surviving, just making sure my children were fed and safe. Love seemed like something other people got to have, not me. Not anymore. But then I came here, and you looked at my 5 children and said you had room for 6, and something shifted inside me." She moved toward him, drawn by the hope and fear in his eyes. "I fought it at first, told myself I was being foolish, that I could not afford to feel this way about my employer. But I do feel it, Douglas. I am falling in love with you too, if I have not already fallen completely. You are kind and strong and patient, and you make me laugh, and my children adore you. You make me feel like maybe the future could be more than just surviving. Maybe it could be living again." Douglas closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "Florence," he breathed, and then he was kissing her, and Florence was kissing him back, and it felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Douglas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything. Marry me, Florence. Let me be a husband to you and a father to your children. Let us make this partnership permanent." Florence felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Douglas let out a whoop of joy that probably woke the entire household and spun Florence around in his arms. She laughed, giddy and breathless, and when he set her down, he kissed her again. Deeper this time, a promise of what their life together could be. They were still standing there, wrapped in each other's arms, when they heard a pointed cough from the doorway. They sprang apart to find Maria standing there with her arms crossed and a knowing smile on her face. "About time," Maria said in Spanish. "I was beginning to think you were both blind." The whole house has known for weeks. Florence felt her face heat with embarrassment, but Douglas just laughed. "We were being proper. Proper is good, but happiness is better. When is the wedding?" Douglas looked at Florence, his eyes warm. "Soon," he said. "As soon as we can arrange it. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." "Christmas," Florence suggested. "That gives us time to prepare, and it would be meaningful to start the new year as a family." "Christmas," Douglas agreed. "Perfect." Maria beamed. "I will make the food. It will be wonderful. Now go to bed, both of you." Separately, she added with a pointed look. "You are not married yet." They obeyed, but not before Douglas stole one more kiss, quick and sweet, a promise of things to come. Florence lay in bed that night, too excited to sleep, marveling at how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She had come to San Elizario desperate and alone, with 5 hungry children and no prospects. Now she had a home, work she was good at, a man who loved her, and the promise of a future that seemed brighter than anything she had dared to imagine. The next morning, they told the children at breakfast. Florence had worried about how they would react, whether they would feel she was betraying their father's memory, or whether they would resent having a new man step into that role. But she should have known her children better. Sarah burst into tears of joy and hugged both Florence and Douglas. James shook Douglas's hand with grown-up solemnity before his composure broke, and he hugged him too. Margaret, William, and Timothy all talked over each other in their excitement, already making plans for the wedding. "Does this mean you will really be our father?" Timothy asked Douglas seriously. Douglas knelt down to be at the child's level. "If you want me to be, I will never try to replace your real father, Timothy. He will always be your papa, and he will always be important. But I would be honored to be your father too, in a different way. To take care of you and your siblings and your mother." "I want that," Timothy said simply, and threw his arms around Douglas's neck. Florence had to turn away to hide her tears, overwhelmed by the sight of this man she loved holding her youngest child with such tenderness. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. There was still all the regular ranch work to be done, but now there was also wedding planning. Florence and Douglas decided to keep the ceremony small and simple, just family and the few friends they had in the area. It would be held at the ranch, officiated by the circuit preacher who came through San Elizario once a month. Florence made herself a new dress with fabric that Douglas insisted on buying, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Maria helped with the sewing, offering advice and wisdom that Florence treasured. The older woman had become not just a housekeeper but a friend, a confidante, almost a mother figure. "Senator Douglas is a good man," Maria told Florence one evening as they worked on the dress together. "I've known him since he was a boy. His father, he was hard sometimes, very focused on the ranch. But Douglas, he has a soft heart. He will be good to you and your children." "I know," Florence said. "I am very lucky." "No," Maria corrected. "He is lucky too. You are strong, brave. You saved this ranch with your work on the accounts. You make him happy in a way I have not seen since his mother died. It is a good match." Christmas dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for a wedding. The house had been decorated with pine boughs and candles, filling the air with the scent of evergreen and wax. Florence dressed in her new blue dress, her hair pinned up in a style Sarah had helped her achieve. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked happy, she realized. Truly happy for the first time in years. Douglas waited for her in the main room, wearing a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. His eyes lit up when he saw her descending the stairs, and Florence felt beautiful under his gaze. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor and support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Douglas kissed her with such joy that everyone in attendance broke into applause. The celebration that followed was small but merry. Maria had outdone herself with the food, and Jake produced a fiddle from somewhere, playing songs that had everyone dancing. Florence danced with Douglas, with each of her children, with Jake and Tom. She felt light, unburdened in a way she had not felt since Thomas died. As the evening wound down and the children were put to bed, Florence found herself alone with Douglas for the first time as his wife. He led her upstairs to his room, which was now their room, and closed the door behind them. "Hello, Mrs. Spencer," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "Hello, Mr. Spencer," Florence replied, smiling up at him. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I thought possible. You have given me so much, Douglas. A home, security, love. I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me. You have given me just as much. Before you came, this house was empty, my life was empty. Now it is full of laughter and love and purpose. You and your children have transformed this place." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Florence let herself get lost in it, in him, in this new life they were building together. Later, lying in his arms in the darkness, she thought about how strange life was, how unpredictable. A year ago, she would never have imagined being here in Texas, married to a rancher she had not yet met, happy in a way she had thought was lost to her forever. "What are you thinking about?" Douglas murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How grateful I am, how lucky." "We both are. This is just the beginning, Florence. We have our whole lives ahead of us." Winter passed in a blur of contentment. Florence settled fully into her role as Douglas's wife and partner, managing the ranch with increasing confidence. The children thrived, growing healthy and strong under the stability of their new life. Sarah turned 13 and was becoming a capable young woman. James, at 10, was already talking about running his own ranch someday. Margaret, William, and Timothy were doing well with their studies and their chores. By March, preparations for the cattle drive were in full swing. Douglas had hired 2 additional hands to make up the crew, young men named Pete and Lucas, who came recommended by Tom. Florence spent hours going over maps and supply lists, making sure they were prepared for every eventuality. The night before they were set to leave, Douglas held her close in bed, his hand resting on her stomach. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "It is not too late to change your mind. I can find someone else." "I am sure. We have been over this, Douglas. I am going. I know, I just worry." "You have become my whole world, Florence. If something happened to you out there, I do not know what I would do." Florence turned in his arms to face him. "Nothing is going to happen. We will make this drive, sell the cattle, secure the ranch's future, and come home. Then we can stop worrying about money and just focus on living." "You make it sound so simple." "That is because it is. We will do this together, just like we do everything else." The morning they left was difficult. The children all lined up to say goodbye, trying to be brave but clearly worried. Florence hugged each of them, reminded them to mind Maria and Sarah, promised to be back before they knew it. Douglas swung up into his saddle and offered Florence a hand up onto hers. She settled into her seat with practiced ease, adjusted her hat against the sun, and looked back one last time at the ranch that had become home. Then she turned her horse north and rode out beside her husband, ready for whatever lay ahead. The cattle drive was everything Florence remembered and more. Long days in the saddle, dust coating everything, the constant work of keeping 40 head of cattle moving in the right direction. They crossed rivers that made her heart pound, weathered a storm that scattered the herd and took a full day to recover from, dealt with everything from rattlesnakes to difficult terrain. But there were also moments of beauty. Sunrises over the prairie that took her breath away. Nights around the campfire sharing stories with the crew. The satisfaction of working together toward a common goal. And always, Douglas beside her, his presence a constant comfort and support. They reached the railhead in Colorado in late May, 2 weeks faster than Douglas had estimated. The cattle sold for a good price, better than they had hoped, enough to pay off all the ranch's debts with money left over. When the buyer handed Douglas the bank draft, Florence saw tears in her husband's eyes. "We did it," he said, pulling her into a hug despite the cattlemen watching with interest. "Florence, we did it. The ranch is saved." "I told you we would," Florence said, but she was crying too, overwhelmed with relief. They celebrated that night with the crew, treating everyone to a proper meal in town and drinks at the saloon. Pete and Lucas were good men who had worked hard, and Douglas paid them a bonus on top of their agreed wages. They would part ways in the morning, the crew heading back to Texas while Douglas and Florence stayed an extra few days to complete the financial transactions and do some shopping. "I want to buy gifts for the children," Douglas said, "and new furniture for the house. Things to make it more of a home." Florence thought of the ranch house, which was already more of a home than anywhere she had lived since leaving Colorado as a bride. But she understood what he meant. They had been living practically, focused on survival. Now they could afford small luxuries, small comforts. They shopped like newly rich people, which in a sense they were. Books for Sarah, a new saddle for James, a rock-tumbling kit for Margaret, a puppy for William to train as his own, a rocking horse for Timothy. New curtains and rugs for the house, a piano that Douglas insisted Florence needed even though she protested she could barely play. "Then you will learn," he said. "We have time now. Time for things besides work and worry." They began the journey home in early June, taking their time, enjoying the luxury of not having to manage a herd of cattle. Douglas was more relaxed than Florence had ever seen him. The weight of debt and worry finally lifted from his shoulders. One evening, camped beside a creek, Douglas pulled Florence into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. "I have been wanting to do this for weeks," he said, "but there were always cattle or crew around. I am glad it is just us now." Florence laughed. "We will be home in a few days." "You can wait a few more days." "I do not want to wait, I want you now." His hands were already untying the laces of her dress, and Florence did not protest. They made love under the stars, urgent and passionate, celebrating their success and their freedom and each other. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bedroll, Douglas's hand drifted to Florence's stomach, resting there in a way that was becoming habitual. "Do you think it is possible?" he asked quietly. Florence had been wondering the same thing. Her monthly courses had not come in 6 weeks, but with the stress and physical demands of the drive, she had not wanted to hope. "Maybe," she said carefully, "it is too early to be sure. But maybe." Douglas pulled her closer, his hand still protective on her stomach. "I hope so. I hope we have a child together, Florence. I love your children as if they were my own, but the thought of creating a life with you, of having that together, makes me happier than I can say." "Me too," Florence admitted. "I did not think I wanted more children. After Timothy, I thought I was done. But with you, I find myself hoping, imagining what our child would look like, whether they would have your eyes or mine." They arrived home to a hero's welcome. The children swarmed them, talking over each other in their excitement. Maria had prepared a feast. Jake and Tom wanted to hear every detail of the drive. It was chaos and joy and everything Florence had missed during their 2 months away. That night, tucked into their own bed again, Douglas held Florence close and whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Spencer." "It is good to be home, Mr. Spencer." Summer passed in a haze of heat and happiness. With the debts paid off, there was money to hire additional permanent help, which took pressure off everyone. Douglas hired 2 more hands and a young married couple to help Maria with the house and grounds. The ranch ran more smoothly than ever, and for the first time since taking over from his father, Douglas seemed able to breathe. Florence's suspicion about the pregnancy was confirmed by Dr. Wright in July. She was indeed expecting, due sometime in late January or early February. Douglas was overjoyed, his happiness infectious. The children were excited too, already making plans for the new baby. "Can we name it if it is a boy?" James asked. "You can suggest names," Florence said diplomatically, "but your father and I will make the final decision." "Father," James said, testing out the word. He had started calling Douglas that sometime during the cattle drive, and it sounded more natural every time. "That sounds right." Florence felt her eyes well up with tears, which happened often these days. Pregnancy emotions, she told herself. But it was more than that. It was gratitude for how fully her children had embraced Douglas, how seamlessly he had woven himself into their family. As summer turned to fall, Florence began to slow down, her growing belly making the physical work of ranching more difficult. Douglas fussed over her, insisting she do nothing more strenuous than the bookwork and light household tasks. Florence protested at first, not wanting to be treated as fragile, but eventually she accepted that pregnancy at 29 was different than it had been at 18. Her body needed rest, and for once, she could afford to give it that rest. The baby came on a cold February night in 1879, arriving with the same determination that characterized everything in Florence's life. The labor was hard but not unusually long, and when Dr. Wright finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Florence felt a surge of love so intense it took her breath away. "A son," Dr. Wright announced. "A healthy son. Congratulations, Mrs. Spencer." Douglas, who had been pacing outside the room despite Florence's insistence he did not need to, burst in the moment he was allowed. His face when he saw his son was something Florence would never forget. Wonder and joy and love all mixed together. "He is perfect," Douglas breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Florence, he is perfect." "He is," Florence agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. But looking at her husband's face filled with such love, Florence knew what the name should be. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Douglas Spencer, after the two men who have been fathers to my children." Douglas looked at her with shining eyes. "Are you sure? I do not want to presume." "I am sure." "Thomas would have liked you, Douglas. He would have been grateful that you took care of his children, that you gave them a father again. This is right." So Thomas Douglas Spencer it was, though he was called Tommy from the start to distinguish him from his late father. The children adored him, taking turns holding him and helping with his care. Even 12-year-old Sarah, who Florence had worried might feel too old to be excited about a baby, was completely smitten. Spring came, and with it another cattle drive, though this time Florence stayed home with the baby. Douglas hired a full crew and left Jake in charge of the ranch in his absence. He was gone for 2 months, and Florence missed him desperately, but she also took pride in managing the ranch in his absence, proving to herself that she was as capable as she had always claimed to be. When Douglas returned, successful once again, he swept Florence and Tommy into his arms and declared he was never leaving them for that long again. "Then we hire a trail boss and let them take the drive while you stay here," Florence said practically. "We can afford it now." "Yes, we can," Douglas agreed, still marveling at that fact. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management. The children grew, each finding their own path. Sarah met a young rancher named Michael at a community dance and married him at 18, settling on the neighboring property. James proved to be a natural rancher and stayed on at the Spencer Ranch, learning everything Douglas could teach him. Margaret surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business and took over more of the financial management as she got older. William trained dogs and started a side business selling working animals to other ranches. Timothy became a skilled horseman and bronc rider, in demand for breaking difficult horses. Florence and Douglas had 2 more children in the years that followed. A daughter they named Lily Rose in 1881, and another son, Patrick, in 1883. The house that had seemed so empty when Douglas lived there alone was now full to bursting with life and laughter and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Douglas took Florence out to the spot where they had first mended fences together, back when she was newly hired and he was falling in love with her, though neither of them would have admitted it. "You remember this place?" he asked, pulling her close. Of course I do. This is where we started becoming partners instead of just employer and employee. I was so worried about taking you on, you know. 5 children seemed like an impossible responsibility. I kept thinking I must be crazy to agree to it. And now, and now I cannot imagine my life without those 5 children, or the 3 we made together, or you. You saved me, Florence. You and your children brought this ranch back to life, brought me back to life. I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I loved you enormously then. Florence kissed him, putting 10 years of love and partnership and shared dreams into it. I love you too, Douglas. You gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. You gave me a partnership when I expected servitude. You gave my children a father when theirs was taken too soon. You are the best thing that ever happened to us. They stood there together as the sun set over the ranch, over the land they had worked so hard to build and preserve. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices, the youngest ones playing while the older ones worked. It was the sound of family, of home, of a life well lived. Florence had come to San Elizario, Texas 10 years ago as a desperate widow with 5 hungry children and no prospects. She had hoped for work, for survival, for a chance to keep her family together. Instead, she had found love, partnership, purpose, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. The cowboy had said he had room for 6, and in doing so, he had given her the world. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm, marked by the seasons of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. By 1890, Sarah had given Florence and Douglas 3 grandchildren, and James had married a teacher from town and was expecting his first child. The Spencer Ranch had grown to be one of the most successful operations in West Texas, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Florence was 41 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her hands marked by years of work. But she was happy in a way that went soul deep, content with the life she and Douglas had built together. Douglas, at 42, was still strong and vigorous, though he let James take on more of the day-to-day operations now, content to supervise and advise rather than doing everything himself. One evening, after the younger children were in bed, and the older ones had gone to their own homes or bunkhouse, Florence and Douglas sat on the porch as they had so many evenings before. Tommy, now 11, was the last to head upstairs, after Douglas reminded him twice that morning came early and he had chores to do. "We have done well," Douglas said, taking Florence's hand. "We have," Florence agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever think about that first day? When you stepped off the stagecoach with your children, and I thought I must be losing my mind to even consider taking you all on," Florence laughed. "I think about it often. I was so scared, so certain you would send us away like everyone else had. And then you said you had room for 6, and I thought I had misheard you. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Florence corrected. "The best was asking me to marry you, fair point, though they were really the same decision, were they not? Taking you on meant opening my heart to all of you. After that, falling in love was inevitable." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the Texas sky. The land stretched around them, familiar and beloved, shaped by their labor and care. In the morning, there would be work to do, as there always was. But tonight, there was just this: peace, contentment, and the quiet joy of a life shared with someone who understood you completely. Florence thought about the woman she had been 12 years ago, worn down by grief and worry, barely surviving. That woman would have been amazed to see who she had become. Ranch manager, mother of 8, grandmother of 3, partner to a man who loved her more deeply with each passing year. Life had broken her once, but she had rebuilt herself into something stronger, and in the process, She had built a family and a legacy that would last for generations. "What are you thinking about?" Douglas asked, as he so often did. "How grateful I am. How very, very grateful." Douglas raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of affection that had become second nature over the years. "I am the grateful one. You took a lonely rancher and gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to build something that would last beyond his own lifetime. You gave me everything, Florence." "We gave each other everything," Florence corrected. "That is what partnership means." As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally rose and went inside, arm in arm, to the house that had become a home, filled with the people they loved and the life they had chosen. The cowboy had said he had room for 6, but in truth, he had made room for so much more. For hope, for healing, for second chances, and for a love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. In the years to come, their children would tell the story of how their mother had come to the Spencer Ranch with nothing but 5 children and determination, and how their father had looked at that impossible situation and said he had room for 6. It became a family legend, a reminder of the power of saying yes when everything suggested saying no, of choosing hope over fear, of recognizing that the best things in life often come in unexpected packages. And always when the story was told, it ended the same way. They lived happily, worked hard, loved deeply, and built something that lasted. The widow and the cowboy, partners in everything, for all their days.